Welcome back to Respect the Process.
Yeah.
Can I get you a beer or something?
It's going to take more than that. I'm fine now.
When the server comes through, I'll flag him for some stronger stuff. But
the week has not been enjoyable. Wednesday is my big day as far as interviews.
Yeah.
You know, I do I did a couple of radio shows. I did preview for that's going to run on the South Carolina radio network. Obviously, we do this. I'll do Coach DeBoer's radio show later tonight. And nowhere near as enjoyable as last week was.
No.
But it's part of it.
The coaches show that y'all did with the cinder block background really just kind of encapsulated the mood of the game.
Well,
let
me tell you what. We've done a few of the – I say we've done. I've only done 6 counting the preseason show, I think, with Coach DeBoer. But – when Bama loses on the road, and it's rare, but when it does happen, you generally have that type of backdrop because you can't do the show on the field as we normally would do.
Not when they're tearing down the goalposts. That makes it a little tougher.
You know, again, there was a better chance. We had plenty of room in the other end zone to do it because, God bless them, the Vandy fan base only filled up between the 20s. Every Vandy fan that was at the game, it wasn't exactly flooding the field, but they got the field drenched, if you want to call it that.
They did it in orderly fashion.
They earned the right to celebrate. They were having to ask directions on how to get down to the field, all of that. But there would have probably been room, but you do that show somewhere in the locker room, and it's usually not as scenic a backdrop. There's not a lot of space in that stadium, but we got it done. Coach shared some thoughts in the immediate aftermath. Then he had his regular Monday press conference and addressed it more. I'm just thankful we're now at the midway point. Yes, we'll talk about it today and then put it to rest and move on and get ready for South Carolina.
Okay, last week at the end of the show, you said if you can't get motivated and still can't get motivated for the Vandy game, then you've got a maturity problem.
Mm-hmm. I did.
Where, and this is not gotcha journalism because believe me, I am not clever enough to do that. But we feel like there are a lot of problems. Where does maturity rank
I think
based on what we've seen?
Yeah, look, and maturity that can be very bad. It's also one of those things that falls under human nature. We saw some examples of it. Plenty's been said. I'm not going to beat up on a kid who has been a great example of what you want a student athlete to be. And I don't just mean that in a general sense. Truly, as a student athlete, Malachi's been a great example of that. I would hate to think that my worst moment took place in front of 28,000 people in person in a national television audience. Unfortunately for him, his did. He's addressed it. He's apologized. He said the coaches are dealing with it. They've said they've got his back. So I'm not going to be a part of piling on. Was it a bad look? Of course it was. And if you have a captain who is doing that, then obviously that's not a good sign. But the fact that he handled it almost immediately afterwards, and the fact that you had other players that were stepping in and saying, hey, man, we got you, calm down, and that it didn't just splinter entirely, that's a positive. The situation wasn't a positive, but the way it was handled, the way it was addressed, and the way he has responded since then is a good sign. It's not good that it happened.
Yeah.
This team's got a lot of just from a football standpoint. Forget the fit and all that. The team's clearly got areas they've got to grow up. You got to hang on to the football when you're, and you got to do things to protect the quarterback when you're driving with what could be the go-ahead touchdown. And if it does take place, then you're probably going to win the game because the other team will probably duck its head and go, okay, this is what was supposed to happen. Alabama was supposed to beat us. Bama could never get them down to where they had the negative thought in their head. So that plays a role in it. I think also the fact that Alabama was not able to get off the field on third down was a massive part, and there were so many opportunities to do that. Yeah, it finished, I think, 12 of 18 on third downs for Vanderbilt. But there was a time there where it was basically 10 out of 12, 10 out of 13. And, man, that's a lot. That's a lot of snaps that you're having to play against a team that makes you work. And it is a grind.
Yeah.
And they were worn down, and it made it a struggle. And I know we got more to break down, and I'm not going to just go on a 30-minute oratory on this. But those are among the things. It's not just behavior. It's making plays that have to be made at a very crucial time consistently, because we saw that take place against Georgia. But it didn't happen against Vanderbilt, which I think if it happens against anybody else in the SEC other than the name Vanderbilt, the reaction is not quite what it is. But it's because we have the mentality and the mindset that Vanderbilt's terrible.
Well, but that mindset and mentality, as you know, you were in the stadium, there was a quote from former head coach Nick Saban saying that every place in the SEC is tough to play except Vanderbilt.
And he's right. It has been.
It has been.
And it's not where you're playing them, but it's this Vanderbilt team. We do a tease. Tom Stipe writes a tease that I voice for every broadcast, and it runs coming out of the last commercial break before kickoff. And there was a line that Tom wrote that I recited in this piece that said, "But this ain't your daddy's Vanderbilt." It was leading into the game. That's the case.
It is. I
if it
agree.
didn't say Vandy, if it said South Carolina, if it said Missouri most years, anybody other than Vandy, you'd have looked at that and gone, man, this is a pretty dangerous team.
Yeah.
But because it was Vanderbilt, people went, okay, you're going to win. It's going to be a piece of cake.
And I think you've probably heard it as much as I have, that this never would have happened under Nick Saban. And Kalen DeBoer was going to lose a game. He was going to lose a first game somewhere.
Yeah.
This was the one. And I think that is why so many people are everybody was buying Kalen DeBoer stock after the Georgia game.
Sure.
And you reached the highest of highs almost in the regular season, and then you immediately ducked down to the lowest of lows.
Yeah. And again, part of it, the biggest part of it, is because of who it was. But who it was is not who they've been. And I was on a show this morning. A couple of guys, one in particular that I really respect. But he asked me, and then he disagreed with me in my answer, saying it was the worst loss in Alabama history. I'm like, wait a minute. It's a tough loss. It's a bad loss. It's an unranked team. When you're number one in the country, they don't have a home field advantage. We had more fans there than they did. I get it. But that ain't the worst loss in history, because it hasn't cost you anything yet but a perfect season. It hadn't cost you a trip to Atlanta. It hadn't cost you the SEC title. It hasn't cost you a chance to play for a national title. It's an embarrassing, disappointing, bad loss.
Yeah.
But it didn't cost you anything tangible to this point. The kick six was a far worse loss. Not because of who it was, not that Auburn was a terrible team, but it cost you a chance at history to your biggest rival.
Right.
In the most bizarre, dramatic way that people are going to talk about forever. That's a whole lot worse than losing to Vandy in week 5 of the season. for this team.
Theoretically, it only dropped you down to number 7 in the polls.
Yep.
Because, again, we talk about the last week they were looking at the body of work that elevated Alabama to number 1.
Right.
The body of work, I think, helped keep them in the top 10.
Here's what I will say, twofold. When you lose, if this had been, you can say, well, Nick Saban never would have lost. Let's say it did. The argument is, well, he's too old to coach. It's almost like people can't just, and I'm not just talking about in this case, you and I have both seen it, teams that we have no vested interest in whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
People take the conversation to extremes and at times irrational to prove that their point right here is correct when they don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to say this is an awful loss, this is an embarrassing loss, this could be a very costly loss, and that shouldn't happen, there is not one aspect of that I could disagree with. When you start using superlatives such as worst loss ever or Saban never would have lost, again, it was his first year, but when Nick Saban lost the first year to Louisiana Monroe, people were losing their minds.
Yeah.
Can't believe we spent all this money on this coach
To lose to La Monroe.
and we're
Yeah.
no better, blah, blah, blah. Okay, look how things played out. You know, now people are saying, oh, yeah, but that was in his first year and he didn't have his talent. Nobody cared then that was being critical of it.
Yeah.
They weren't going to listen to logic. And now the conversation by a few is, well, he shouldn't be wearing a T-shirt on the sideline. I mean, come on. Say you're mad.
Well,
say you're
yeah.
frustrated. Be disappointed. Feel that you deserve better and that the team should play better. That's fine. But some of the stuff we get as outliers just is almost ridiculous. I get it. Fan is short for fanatic. I get it. And nobody could or nobody should be that cares about Alabama, and nobody is that's close to Alabama happy about what happened or tolerant of what happened. But you don't, you know, when I used to play video games and I was trying to get a career best, if I didn't get off to a good start, I'd just turn it off, start back over again. You can't do this. It's real life. It is a game, but it's real life. You got to go play it, and it's what life teaches you. It's what sports teach you about life. Here's what's happened. Here's where we are. We can quit. We can turn against each other, or we can fix it and go forward. And I think Alabama, I know the players and coaches, with all this other stuff going on around them, or in other realms, they've gone back to work, and they're trying to fix the problem because it's their team and their season that's on the line.
Well, exactly. And they've obviously been exposed for some things that worked against what Alabama was trying to do. Particularly, you know, when you look at the time of possession, the fourth quarter alone.
Yeah.
The fourth quarter alone.
What was it? Because I never saw the only
11:40 for Vanderbilt.
11:40. So Bama had it for what?
3 minutes and 20 seconds in the fourth quarter.
I think it was 42-18 for the game. Is that right? For the whole game?
Yes,
I remember.
Think,
I remember
42 to 17-ish. Yeah.
So I remember talking about that or seeing that post game and just shocked. And yet you also realize, okay, there were a lot of good things done, that you only lost by one score in that game, and you only had the ball for that amount of time. And again, don't misread it. Bama should have won the game. Bama should not have allowed it to come to this. But you do have to give credit because they earned it to Vanderbilt. There was a time where Bama's late third quarter, I guess, you've held them to a fourth in about a foot, and they're going to throw the football, and they make a phenomenal play late in the play where quarterback throws it up, and it's a good pass because he put enough air under it for the guy to run under it. But he did it with the guy bearing down on him, and the receiver made a fantastic catch to get to the football. Yes, he got behind the coverage on a freshman. Yes, you're supposed to get off the field on that play. But Vandy made the play. They were good enough to make that play. The forced fumble of Jalen in the fourth quarter when they're driving to go ahead late or midway through the second half, the fourth quarter. That's a heck of a play on their part.
Yeah.
Mistake by Alabama, but a heck of a play right there. It's not like he just dropped it. He got leveled from the blind side.
And so much of the frustration, the offense was working at times, but so much of the frustration was directed at the defense, at how much time they spent on the field. And then you can flip it to where, well, you know what, if the offense can't have sustainable drives that eat up some clock, then we can rest our defense for a few minutes, get their breath, get them back on the field.
Right.
I think it's, okay, well, how come Vanderbilt was able to adapt at halftime, but we weren't able to find a way to adapt at halftime to it? But as we talked about last week, Vanderbilt's offense is one that they don't see very often.
Yep. It's why a lot of us were concerned. Still didn't expect Bama to lose, but we're concerned about what that game could look like because Vandy had the extra week to rest up, heal up, get ready for Alabama. Tide's coming off an incredibly emotional game, ton invested, and it's Vandy, and it's a different look offensively, and it's some guys that have experience as players winning games against SEC teams. They did it last year at New Mexico, so I don't want it for a second to sound like I'm making excuses or that it's okay that it happened or any of that. It's disappointing, it's frustrating, and it hadn't happened since 1984. And if I'm not mistaken, it's only the second time since Watson Brown was the quarterback at Vanderbilt that Vandy won over Alabama.
Time we heard the name Watson Brown?
1969, I think, is when he was the quarterback at Vanderbilt, and they beat Alabama, I think, 14-12 in Nashville. So it doesn't happen very often.
No, and
obviously.
It really was the perfect storm in ways that I know something was thrown at my house, and I can't remember what it was, when we had two of the same number on the field at the same time. And I think it was things like that it's like we can't even get out of our own way right now.
And that happens. It's pretty amazing, frankly, that doesn't happen more often with all this double number stuff because guys want to wear their numbers and coaches
I was trying to explain that at my house of why there are double numbers, and it was not being received.
To wear, the two numbers, and you dress so many. But it's primarily because kids want to wear, the numbers, and a mistake is made. We don't have the same return guy every time. There's situations that dictate who's going to be back there. And it was a mistake made, and that's how you wound up with a pair of deuces on the field, and that didn't go well. That's again one of the maybe it's not one of the 12 times you converted, but it's something that definitely hurt at the time because they did score a touchdown out of that.
And I think one last thing before we move on, it's Alabama fans for the past 17 years. We are conditioned to a coach that is fiery, takes everything very seriously, very personally, in that he is very defensive. And Kalen DeBoer is the polar opposite. He is outwardly
he's the opposite.
He's a nice guy. He's never seems to be real flustered, except for that one time at the Georgia game we saw. But I think it had fans wondering, is he too nice a guy for this job?
Yeah.
Look, or is this just going to be an adaptation process?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, but the answer is, from my perspective, having been around him, knowing his track record, and knowing the circumstances, no, he's absolutely not too nice. Is he different from Coach Saban? Yes. But virtually every other coach virtually every other coach is different from Nick Saban. There are guys that coached for Nick Saban that tried to do it like Nick Saban and failed miserably. You know why? Because they ain't Nick Saban.
And I think that's what hard people to understand is, well, he did it this way. It was successful. Why doesn't everybody else do it this way?
Because they ain't Nick Saban.
Yeah.
You got to be who you are. You've got to be who you are. And look, the reason the guy got the job to begin with is because the way he does it works. It's worked. It's worked everywhere he's been, at every level. It's not something that just recently happened. It's not like he caught, it happens a lot of places, and look around the country at teams or coaches that have one great season, and then stuff happens, and all of a sudden you're 0-5 or whatever the record may be. It's a bad game. It's a tough loss.
And they weren't the only ones.
It could cost you, by the end of the year, it could cost you a spot in Atlanta. It could cost you a spot in the playoff. But it could simply be a learning opportunity and a wake-up call. Everybody was ready to pour dirt on Alabama last year after the loss to Texas.
Yeah.
They were ready to shovel the dirt on Alabama, on Nick Saban's dynasty, on Alabama's run. And you know what? That bunch got better and won every game until they got beat in the national semifinal, which kept them from having the opportunity to play Kalen DeBoer in Washington because they were in the national championship last year.
Well, for those of us that we did still keep watching football on Saturday night, some people, the TV was no longer working after their game was over. But Alabama was not the only top 5 team, top 10 team that was beat on Saturday.
Sure.
And do you think this is part of the introduction to parity as we see the Power 5
100%
escalate?
Yeah, that's a great point, Kel. I'm glad you brought it up. There are more good players at every Power 4 program. Vanderbilt's got more good players than they've had. Are they better than Alabama's players? Absolutely not. But everybody's got more good players where it can be competitive if your good players aren't playing at the level they're capable of. Clark Lee's done a really good job. They know who they are. They understand who they've got to be and what they've got to look like. They're pretty talented. They went and got a guy who can win, a veteran guy who can sling it, brought some players with him. He runs that option well. It clearly gave Alabama fits. But they're also a little saltier on defense than they've been. Because there were fewer snaps, because there were fewer plays, they held Alabama to, if not their lowest scoring total, close to it for the season. They did a good job. Part of it, it's to put it in the old basketball terms, they spread the floor and ran the clock.
Yeah.
That's one reason why. They knew they couldn't run with Alabama, so to speak. That game played out perfectly for Vanderbilt to get the win. And that hopefully is going to be something that going forward the guys understand we can't afford to allow a game to get that way. No,
DeBoer said after the game on the show when you two were talking that, they stay on the field, they shorten the game.
Yeah.
That's just the
no doubt.
Fact of the matter. That's what's going to happen. Okay, well, Alabama has decided to play another game this weekend.
I heard that.
Number 7, Alabama will be hosting South Carolina.
They're not canceling the program?
That's not what I've heard yet.
Good. I just want to know whether to make a tea time for Saturday.
No, I mean, I spoke with someone who was inside the building today, and I was like, how's the vibe? And they're like, we'll see on Saturday. So, again, you hope that these, as we said, that the maturity of these players, they handle it within themselves amongst the team. And, again, we are not privy to everything that goes on.
We're not. Again, I'm looking forward to spending some time with Coach tonight on the radio show. And
when do I get to help host that?
You know what? We don't do media guests anymore. We don't do media guests. He has players with him. You missed your window.
Gummit, my dadgum kids.
Your dadgum kids.
Raising kids.
It stinks, doesn't it? The whole
dog
parenthood
it.
thing.
Okay.
the show will have him and one of the players I've forgotten. It's Jeremy Bernard.
Oh,
that's going to be with him.
Yeah.
First time to meet Jeremy and to have a chance to visit with him. But that's the route we'll go with the show.
This past weekend.
He did. He's been a great addition. Guy that came from Washington, and we'll get can give us a little backstory on Coach and all of that. It's not going to be as much fun a show to do as it was a week ago, or as much fun as it's been every other week. But I'll be really surprised if
nobody
Coach
shows
DeBoer's, up. No, they'll be there. There'll be a lot of people sitting there like this.
Yeah.
But Coach DeBoer, I would fully expect him to be very candid, very blunt, very open and honest, but also even-keeled with everything. So I am looking forward to talking to him. I did the TV show, as you mentioned, after the game in the locker room, and that's kind of an immediate, literally, reaction. But a chance to, now that dust has settled and this team's gone back to work, get some perspective from him on where they are and how things look.
Yep. Well, we got an 11 o'clock kickoff on Saturday, so
do?
that puts y'all at what broadcast time for the Crimson Tide Sports Network?
4 o'clock on Friday afternoon.
There you go. Yep.
No, not quite.
Happy
not
hour,
quite.
and then the pre-dawn breakfast.
That's it. 8 o'clock airtime on Saturday morning.
Pancake breakfast out there
It
with
is.
everybody. Just have a flapjack eating contest.
There we go, Sailor.
Okay, because we will be interested to see how this team comes out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I really am. I'm curious. I think I know how they're going to play.
Yeah.
But I want to see it just like everybody else does. And I'm glad that, today really marks the turn the page.
We got to put our
time.
past behind us. To quote Lion King.
Yeah, you got a South Carolina team that's every bit as dangerous as Vanderbilt. Different look, different style, something Bama's more accustomed to. And again, if they didn't have their eyes set squarely on their opponent after the Georgia game, they will fully have their eye on the opponent today. There's no looking ahead to Tennessee. They will absolutely be focused on this matchup with the Gamecocks.
Looking forward to it.
I am.
Looking forward to.
I'll be glad to. I say that and hopeful
And
that I'll be glad that
turn the page.
Yes, turn that page and move on to the next game, next
Move on to
opponent.
the good stuff.
Hopefully.
If you're always looking for Chris Stewart, who isn't, we can always find you at chrisstewart.online.
Yes, ma'am.
And, of course, on the Crimson Tide Sports Radio Network tonight with, do they still call it Hey Coach? Or what do they call
Hey
it?
Coach and the Kalen DeBoer Show. It used to be Hey Coach and the
Yeah.
Nick Saban Show because the old name was strictly Hey Coach.
Yeah.
But now the first 30 minutes of that is Hey Coach, talking to whoever the other sport coach is, and then it transitions to a 1 hour
Nice.
Kalen DeBoer show, just as it was
right.
a 1 hour Nick Saban show.
Again, that's good value.
There you go.
That's good value for
2
your
for
dollar.
1.
Yeah. Got to thank Scott Forrester for using wonderfully soft lighting to help us here, and for all of the magic he works back there, and for Tim Melton for never responding, new phone, who dis. And if anything you need for Cover Crimson, all of your Alabama needs, we've got you covered between the next round, obviously here at Respect the Process, and the many other multitude of shows. But before we go,
Roll
we've got
Tide,
I stepped on that
please.
one more time.
No, I did. Roll Tide.
Okay. For Chris Stewart, I'm Kelly Honor. We'll catch y'all next week. Thanks for watching.